wanted to kind of show you guys how I end up creating my spreadsheets and how I create my projections based off all this data import. This is going to be a really general explanation. It's not going to be into the specifics and all these crazy formulas that I've been using. I might make one of those in the future, but that would take a lot longer to explain it all. So I'm just going to kind of give the gist of it. If you have any questions, you're welcome to comment or shoot me some sort of message and let me know that you'd like me to kind of go into detail about that stuff. So as you can see down here, we got team stats from 2017. So this is just the totals of each respective team with all of their stats right here. And so what I did is that once you get that data from, there's various sources you can get it from, create it into a table or at least just name the area. For me, it's totals 17. So when you're referencing that later, it's a lot easier rather than referring to A1 through M33 or some shit like that. You can just reference the table and say total 17. That's a lot easier for you to kind of figure out. So then over here is 2017 player stats. That's another thing that's pretty easy to find. And you just bring it into a table, same thing as last time. The only difference with this one is I've made an index, which is one of those more complex things that I can kind of go into detail in a later video. But this one, as you can see, is called Stats 17, just something short, sweet, easy to help you remember and be able to reference back. So down here I have some 2018 projections. I want to say these are, I don't even know what the source is of this one. I oftentimes use guys like fantasy footballers, love them, football guys, Pro Football Focus, etc. There's most of the time it's kind of a composition of all these sources. Again, there's an index which is pretty complicated, so we'll avoid that for right now. Here's some more individual projections. I believe these are Pro Football Focuses. Yeah, PFFP. And what I did is I just took the individual projections and then I summated them into another table right here, which is the 2018. I just put a Team 18 total projections, and I'll explain why all of these tables are relevant in a second. So now we're going to go down to my main tab, team breakdown. It's pretty complex, a little bit overwhelming at first, but overall it's pretty simple. So up here we have the 2017 team stats, just kind of totaled, and that is based off whatever team I put in here. I have all of them listed. Fuck Cleveland, let's go to a different team. Let's see, New Orleans, kind of interesting to see this. Okay, so next, as I said, I have all these, which I believe are bringing them in from, yep, total 17, as you can see right up here. So then down here you have the individual players' stats. God damn, his name is so long. Woohoo. I'm not even gonna try that one. But anyway, so this just has all the breakdown for the 2017 stats. And then what I did with these stats specifically is I broke it down into a market share. So what you can do is you can just take the total, and then you can take the percentage of the total that a specific player has, and that will give you an individual team market share. So as you can see, one thing to notice about this is passing yards are skewed because of the sacks, because sacks get taken off of passing yards, but it doesn't take away from the individual player's passing yard. It's really confusing, but that's why you see this 103. You shouldn't see that for anything other than passing yards. So like Mark Ingram, 51.8% of the rushes. Alvin Kamara had 27 rush yards right here as well. Michael Thomas has 27% of the targets. As I said, these are all just dividing the player's individual statistics from 2017 by the total of that team. And what that does is it can give you a nice little breakdown. So this reference for these players here is based off who is returning. Obviously, it's not every single player that's listed, but for the most part, it's the guys that we think are going to be fantasy relevant. And what that does is that can give you the totals down here and see how much is really still available. And then you can kind of take those numbers and distribute them amongst the players that weren't there last year or the players that were hurt. Guys like Cam Meredith, Traquan Smith, Boston Scott. I don't think he's going to get any fucking carries anyway. Terrence West should be on this list too because Ingram's going to be missing some games. But anyway, so then what you can do is take the 2017 market shares, and then multiply it out by the 2018 total team projections. So like I mentioned in that prior tab, I have the total team projections and the individual team coming from the same source, but those are all listed here. And then what I did was take the market shares of last year and multiply them by the total team projections for 2018, just to give a rough idea. If nothing changed, their previous market share stay the exact same, this is what would end up being the result. Obviously things change, so this isn't really a good way to make projections, but it's a good way to kind of get a gauge as to what you should be thinking and what's realistic and what's not. So as you can see, I think I made this initial spreadsheet prior to the Ingram suspension, so a lot of these projections need to be adjusted based off that, because he's obviously going to lose a lot of carries, probably a lot of yardage as well for missing all those games. But Drew Brees is a guy who shouldn't really change much, so if he keeps 103%, see, I need to manually adjust things like that. But anyway, passing touchdowns, 100%. The total team projection from Pro Football Focus was 26.4. Obviously, that's all going to Drew Brees. Michael Thomas, if he keeps the same share, he'll have 105 receptions. That's pretty good numbers. His touchdowns were pretty pathetic last year, so that's why you see it so low. That is definitely something that I would adjust manually when I came in. So as we're getting to the manual adjustments that I just mentioned, over here, same thing, same data import with all the players that I had in the previous table, except for this time, it's the 2018 projected market share. So this is what I believe they're going to end up getting. So it's still taking the 2018 team totals that I have from Pro Football Focus and multiplying it by my market share. The only difference is I'm manually adjusting it and then comparing it to what it was last year as a way to make sure you're not being crazy, but also a way to adjust things like Mark Ingram being out, like Michael Thomas having such a low touchdown total, things like that. This is from a previous team, so just disregard this stuff at the moment. So we can go ahead and do that out for somebody. Yeah, let's do Michael Thomas. So if we're comparing it to Michael Thomas last year, let's see, Michael Thomas last year had 27.8% of the targets. I think that is something that will continue, so we'll give him 27. Reception-wise, he's got incredible hands, so you can kind of rely on that. God damn, look at that. So 26.94, we'll give him 27 again. And receiving yards, we'll give him 28. Receiving touchdowns. So this is the thing that I definitely want to increase. He's only at 21.74 receiving touchdowns, even though he had tons of red zone opportunity. It was a bizarre year. It was kind of like a Julio flunk year. So I'm going to bump him up from that 21.74, bump him up to something like, not absurd, but something like 25. And then what we're going to see here, as I said, just disregard these guys. That's from a prior thing. So what we're going to see here, I need to bump all these down to 0 first, though, because I don't think he's getting all those carries, or any carries for that matter. So then what we can see here for Michael Thomas specifically is 152 targets, 105.5 receptions, 1,220.2 yards, and 6.6 receiving touchdowns. And then what I have is I also have the fantasy points based off that, fantasy points per game. So that's a good way to kind of just look at the stats from last year, look at the market shares from last year, and then compare them. One other cool thing we could do right now is Mark Ingram. So what we can do is we can give Mark Ingram what he had last year, just so I can see it over here, and then kind of adjust from there. So Mark Ingram was 51.8% of the carries last year. Obviously, I'm going to adjust all these down, but I just want to see based off that. And he had 54% of the rushing yards. That's a high total. And then he had 52.7% of the rushing touchdowns. Target-wise, he was also fairly effective. 13, 15, 9. Okay. He had 0 receiving touchdowns, though. Wow. That is also strange. 15, 9. Another telemarketer, probably. All right. And then, so Alvin Kamara, I don't really know which way you're supposed to pronounce it, but whatever. Camario. Shout out to fantasy footballers. All right, so we're going to go to targets, 18%. Like I said, I'm just keeping them the same at the moment, and then we'll kind of manually adjust based off the fact that Ingram's going to be suspended for 4 games. 19. and then 21.74, which is absurdly high. That's something that I don't think will continue. Rushing yards, oh, I got to get that as well. 27, 35, 34. Okay, 27, 35, and 34. There you at? All right, so if everything were to remain the same as last season, based off the total team projections that we have from Pro Football Focus, that will result in Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, 256.33, 224.15 fantasy points per game. You can see there as well. Obviously, we have to take out 4 games worth from Mark Ingram, and a lot of that is going to be given to Alvin Kamara directly. I think in general, Kamara would see a little bit more carries than he did last year, so I want to go ahead and bump him up to like that would bump him up, in my opinion, that would bump him up to like 0.3 without Ingram being suspended, just from the fact that he's not a rookie anymore, and he's going to kind of, the leash will be a little bit longer this year, and we'll give him, because of the Ingram suspension, I don't know, 0.35. I think that's fair. Rushing yards, same thing. I'm going to bump it up a lot, not excessively, because I think he might be a little bit less efficient. I don't know, 0.39. Rushing touchdowns, we'll bump him up to like 0.4. I think that's maybe 0.38. Ingram, we're going to decrease a little bit, not drastically. I still think he'll get a lot of carries. It's just going to be missing all those games. So let's see, 0.41. I think that's fair. Rushing yards, we'll drop him down 0.48. Like I said, these are all just complete estimates. I just want to show you how the numbers can break down when you make these changes. Drop him down to 0.48. As far as considering he already had 0 for his receiving touchdowns, I don't really think the reception stuff I need to mess with a whole lot right now, because I don't think that's going to change a ton. Though I do think we should give Kamara a little bit of a boost for target share, and a little bit of a boost for reception. I mean, very minor boosts here. Okay, and receiving yards, same thing, just a little minor boost. Receiving touchdowns, I'm going to actually decrease a little bit, just because I think there's some regression that's going to come with that. Not a ton, but just a little bit. All right, so once we make all those changes, we see that we got a pretty big bump for Kamara. He's up to 16.95 per game. Not a huge dent on Mark Ingram. I think I would have to knock this a little bit more, because that's really just, I think that's too much for 12 games. But anyway, another good thing to do with that is to add in some sort of conditional formatting, where whatever this ends up being, once I actually make the market share adjustments, it compares it to some projection source. So, for example, Pro Football Focus. And if it's drastically higher than they have individually, I'll have it so that the font becomes red, something like that, just so you're able to kind of see outliers, make outliers obvious, just make sure you're not being crazy. Sometimes it happens, you're just kind of being overly optimistic or pessimistic on a certain player, and things like that can happen. But in general, I just kind of want to show you guys how I go from there. So what I would essentially do at the end is, once I have the whole team statted out the way I want it, I would kind of just duplicate this team breakdown tab, and then save the duplicated version as the team that I'm working on. And then by the time that I get through all the teams, I will have a tab for each team, and then kind of my own customized projections for each team.